Bonjour! Today we'll study the age of absolutism. We shall study Louis XIV, who has lived from 1638 to 1718. He reigned for 72 years, which is the longest of any European monarch. As we study Louis XIV, we must ask ourselves a few questions about him. First, we ask, how did Louis XIV rule as an absolute monarch? And this idea of absolute means he has complete power over his kingdom, that his authority is complete, and he controls all of the aspects of the kingdom. To do this, he had to acquire control over his nobility. So the second question is, how did he control the nobles? And we shall see he did this at the Palace of Versailles. We'll ask, what were the major accomplishments of his reign? We see that he was a military commander as well as a patron of the arts. Finally, we'll ask, is he a good king? Why or why not? And this is a tough question because we must ask, is he morally good, but also was he efficient as ruling as a king? Let us begin by looking at a picture of him, a painting, and we will ask, what impression does he make? We stare at him and see his black puffy hair and a bit of a proud expression on his face. He has a gold-hilted sword with jewels. He has a flowing robe, a scepter and crown, and look at those mighty calf muscles. Very powerful muscular man, apparently. Altogether, this is a strange picture, though, because many modern people will think he looks strange. He looks perhaps arrogant, a bit pompous. And yet this is a symbol of the great power of Louis XIV. But perhaps Louis had reason to be proud. During his reign he transformed the monarchy by ushering in a golden age of art and literature. He presided over a dazzling royal court at Versailles. He annexed key territories from Germany and Holland and established his country as the dominant European power. So how did he do this? How did Louis achieve such power at his court? The short answer is Versailles. The great palace in the vicinities of Paris was a wonder of the world at the time, and it attracted the nobility of France. Here, with the gardens and the fountains and the beauty, Louis could dominate his nobles by having them entertained at his expense. The splendor and luxury of Versailles attracted nobility, who no longer lived on their own estates in the castles, but now they dwelt in the effulgence of the king's countenance. They saw him to bed at night, and in stately procession they greeted him in the morning. It was deemed a high honor to hand him his shirt as he was being dressed, or at dinner to provide him with a fresh napkin. One may wonder, why would the French give so much power to their king? Perhaps one answer is that the French people placed far more reliance upon a powerful king than their neighbors, such as the English or the Dutch, because the French were not protected from the sea from their neighbors, as England was. On every side, France had enemies ready to take advantage of any weakness or hesitation which might arise from dissension between the nobles and the king. So the French, perhaps, felt that to leave the power in the king's hand was a necessary sacrifice. This centralization of power leads to absolute control, and this is why we say that Louis XIV was an absolute monarch. And Louis liked to control everything in his kingdom. It was said that he delighted in all sorts of petty details, such as the dress and uniforms of his soldiers, and even the way the cooks prepared his food. Louis was particularly proud of the military power of France and wished to expand her borders. Louis wished to use the military to expand the borders of France to what he considered her natural boundaries. This included the Rhine River in the east, the Pyrenees Mountains in the south, and the English Channel in the north. Louis XIV was especially obsessed with conquering the Spanish Netherlands, which he believed belonged to France by ancient right, and so he pressed on with his army to conquer all of the lands between France and the Rhine River. However, England, the United Provinces, and the Holy Roman Empire allied against him to stop him from this conquest. So, ultimately, Louis XIV failed to achieve his military goals. And so, in conclusion, we ask, what did Louis accomplish in his reign? and we must admit that at the Palace of Versailles, he succeeded in centralizing the power and attracting all of the nobles under his sway. However, this cost an enormous amount of wealth. He spent all of the treasure of the kingdom on Versailles and the Grand Palace, and he also spent it on the great wars of conquest that ultimately ended in failure. And so if we are to ask, is Louis XIV a good king? We see that he was a powerful king, he was an effective king, and yet ultimately many believe that Louis XIV's reign would ultimately lead to the French Revolution, in which the peasants rose up and overthrew the nobility, executed the king, Louis XVI, and did away with the old government, which they believed to have been very corrupt. And yet, despite all of his faults, Louis would be known as the Sun King for the splendor and magnificence of his reign. All of his nobles were as the planets revolving around him, and yet they learned that his power could also be destructive. Thank you for watching. Au revoir.